Hello and welcome to all of you on my channel Biological World. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic of nitrogen cycle, which is sometimes critical for all types of students. Either that student belongs to university level or college level or even the secondary or higher secondary level. Whatever is the level, mostly students feel it a bit difficult or a bit confusing. So we are going to discuss this cycle today to make it easier for the students. So let's start the topic. Actually, before the nitrogen cycle, we are going to discuss about what are biogeochemical cycles, because only in that way we are going to understand that why the nitrogen cycle is important and why it is very important for some organisms to participate in these cycles like bacteria and fungi. So let's have a definition of biogeochemical cycles, and then we will be discussing about the nitrogen cycle later. The definition of the biogeochemical cycles is natural pathway or cycle in which essential elements of living organisms are circulated between the environment and the living objects. Actually, we know that the good earth is made of almost more than 92 elements. Out of these naturally occurring elements, there are many elements which are parts of the living objects. For example, we are establishing a point that we have naturally occurring chemicals or naturally occurring elements, and the total amount is 92. But there are certain elements are known as bioelements, essentially those elements which are taking part in metabolism or which are taking part in the makeup or design of the living objects like bacteria, like human, like any sort of other living object. And those bioelements are 16, almost 16 out of 92. So out of those 16, let's have examples of some of those very important elements. For example, carbon is one of those 16 elements. Hydrogen is one of those 16 elements. Oxygen, then phosphorus, and then nitrogen. So it means that we have elements that are also a very essential part of the living objects. This is the rule of the bioelements, that these should be moving in circles. For example, I have mentioned that these elements are part of Earth. So we can say that either you can write Earth or environment here. These elements should be moving from the Earth or environment to living object and then back to the environment. This is a biogeochemical cycle in which all of these elements, if these are becoming a part of a living object, these must be returned back to the earth, or these must be returned back to the environment. This is the theme of these bioelements. This means that we have the cyclic processes for carbon, for hydrogen, for oxygen, for phosphorus, and for nitrogen. And you know very well that we have studied in the junior classes about carbon cycle, hydrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, phosphorus cycle, nitrogen cycle. All of these elements have their own cycles in which these elements become the part of the living object, and then these are returned back to earth. Now a question arises that how do these elements become the part of the living objects? Because we have established these were not actually the part of the living objects. These were originally part of the earth or environment, and these are then become the parts of the living objects. So let's have a small discussion about this. For example, you know the process of photosynthesis. In process of photosynthesis, we say that we have a reaction in which we use carbon dioxide and water, and then we create the glucose or organic compounds. This is notable in this reaction, in this equation. From the environment, we are taking the carbon and hydrogen and we are combining them into the organic compound. So it means that when we talk about that we take the elements and we make them parts of the living objects, it actually means that we take these free elements from the nature, we make them locked into the organic compounds, and now you can understand that the carbon, hydrogen and oxygen are now locked in this molecule of glucose, and these must now be freed from this glucose. All of these elements should be freed now. So many of the living objects of our earth, for example bacteria, they are called as decomposers. They separate the carbon dioxide and water from this glucose and they return it back to the environment. So it means that these elements which we have mentioned as bioelements, there are certain reactions that make these elements a part of our organic compounds, and those organic compounds become the part of our body. For example, we have glucose in our body in different forms, either in free form or in the form of glycogen. We have glucose. So we can say that there are certain reactions that make these free elements of our part of our body. So coming to the point, we are going to discuss about the nitrogen cycle in today's topic. And about the nitrogen cycle, as we have seen that in glucose we have three elements C, H and O. But if you talk about the nitrogen cycle, you must know that where do we use the nitrogen? Actually, we use the nitrogen in proteins. How? We make the proteins with the help of amino acids, and these amino acids are composed of these elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and I think you all know the answer, nitrogen. These are the elements of the amino acid. So we can take carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen with the help of photosynthesis, but there must be some other process that are making the nitrogen a part of our organic molecules. For example, if I say that what elements we are going to use in fats, mostly these are CHO, mostly, not always. Then if we are talking about the carbs or carbohydrates, these are also common. But when we are talking about the proteins and when we are talking about the DNA, both of these compounds have C, H, O, and N. DNA may also possess the nitrogen, protein may also possess the sulfur, but right now we are talking about the common elements. The common elements are CHON. So our problem is that the nitrogen cannot be added in organic compounds by plants. For example, if we talk about the N2, which is N triple bond N, plants cannot make the nitrogen a part of organic compounds, a part of its organic compounds. So first, what do we have to do? The first process in which we should be converting this nitrogen into some usable form, into any form in which this nitrogen can be made a part of the organic compound. So it should be in usable form. So what are we going to do? Now the nitrogen cycle is going to be started. We should be make the nitrogen a part of the organic compound, but for that purpose, we cannot use nitrogen. We have to convert nitrogen. We have to make the nitrogen usable. And for that purpose, what are we going to do? We are going to follow a process which is known as nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation is actually a process in which some bacteria on our earth, they convert the N2 into the usable form. For example, they perform a reaction N2 and H2 and they convert that N2 into ammonia or ammonium ions. This is the first step of nitrogen fixation. In this process, we are converting the nitrogen, which is N2, into the ammonia or ammonium ion. Now we have fixed the nitrogen. These forms are usable. We are further going to convert this fixed nitrogen into some other form. But keep this in mind that this is the fixed form. So let's have a picture depiction of all this process. This is the nitrogen that is present in the form of N2, and notice here that we can also perform this process with the help of lightning or with the help of some volcanic eruption. It can also occur, but we are going to discuss it today as a biological process. And if we are talking about the biological process, we are going to talk about the biological entities. So focus on this nitrogen. This nitrogen is coming all the way downward to here. There are some bacteria which are fixing the nitrogen on our earth. There are some bacteria which are living in root nodules, and there are certain bacteria which are free living bacteria. So now we should be understanding that there are two types of bacteria which are performing this process. One bacteria are known as symbiotic bacteria. These symbiotic bacteria are actually in a relationship. These are actually in a mutualistic relationship with the legume plants. Suppose this is a legume plant. These are living in very special structures, known as root nodules. In this process, these bacteria fix the nitrogen and they provide this nitrogen to the plant. And in return, the plant gives them the glucose. So what does it mean? It actually means that both are getting benefited. The bacteria are giving them nitrogen and the plant is giving them glucose. And there are some other bacteria which are fixing nitrogen. One was symbiotic bacteria and the other was free living bacteria. These free living bacteria are also known as cyanobacteria, and cyanobacteria are also performing the nitrogen fixation, and they are not in a relationship with any of the plants, so they are counted as free living bacteria. Coming back to the diagram, you can see these are the bacteria. Focusing on let me focus on the diagram. Just look at this structure. This is a nodule, and the bacteria are living with it, and they are providing the plant with the nitrogen. And let me scroll down. These are free living bacteria. These are living in the soil, and they are just fixing the nitrogen and converting that nitrogen into ammonium ion or ammonia. Now let's move to the next step, which is very important, because nitrogen is not yet a part of the plant. We have to make it a part of the plant. How we can perform this? We are going to convert the fixed nitrogen into such a form, into such a structure that would be easily absorbed by the plants. Just look at this process. In this process, there are certain bacteria which are performing the nitrification. What is the process of nitrification? We are going to convert this ammonia and ammonium ion into nitrites and then into nitrites and nitrates. This process would be known as the nitrification. So nitrification is the process, and there would be nitrifying bacteria. The process is nitrification. So nitrification would be performed by the nitrifying bacteria, and we would be converting the ammonium ion or ammonia into NO2 negative or NO3 negative. Especially these nitrates, these are soluble. So these soluble nitrates would be added into the water. Obviously, if these are soluble, then these would be added into the water, and then these would be absorbed by the plants, absorbed by plant. So now it is going to be the part of a plant. Just look at this diagram. You must focus on this blue arrow, this one. The nitrates are getting into the plant. These are the plants, and these plants would be eaten by the animals. Food chain would start, and this food in this from this food chain, the nitrogen would again come back to the environment. How? For example, you have given the plants the nitrogen, and the plants have converted these NO3 negative into the amino acid, which certainly means that you have now made the nitrogen a part of the organic compound. And according to our concept of today, we have locked the nitrogen now because we have made it the part of the organic compound, so it means it has been locked. So certainly these plants would be eaten by the animals in the form of organic compound, and the plant would and the animals would again use it as the organic compound for their processes, for their metabolism. So it is still locked. How are we going to unlock it? Focus on this diagram here. You can see that for unlocking, we are going to decompose the organic compounds. For example, from the urine. From the urine, we have urea. We have urea there, and urea, the formula of urea is C double O NH C double bond O NH2, which means that it have two amine groups, and we are going to separate the nitrogen from it. So animals can give us urine, and then additionally, when the plants or animals die, they are decomposed by the fungus and bacteria. Once again, these are then converted into the nitrogen is going to be converted again. How? The decomposers, bacteria and fungi would perform the process of ammonification. This ammonification is actually a process occurring during the decomposition. When the plants and animals they die, they then are going to be decomposed by the decomposers, and the decomposers would convert the amino acid, the amine group of amino acid, into the ammonia and ammonium compounds. So it has come back to that previous form. It has come back to that previous form. Now this process would be called as the ammonification. In ammonification, the amino acid would be converted into ammonium ion and ammonia. So the process would be repeating, and the nitrates can again be formed. But be focused now. These nitrates would be a source of returning the nitrogen back to the environment. For that purpose, what are we going to do? We are going to convert the ammonia or ammonium ion into the nitrogen, into the nitrates, and then these nitrates would be broken into nitrogen and oxygen. So focus on my point now. These nitrates would be converting. This process is known as denitrification. Denitrification. And in this process, there are also bacteria involved. These bacteria would separate the nitrogen and oxygen from this process, and the nitrogen would be freed and returned back to, focus here, these are bacteria. The nitrogen would be freed and it would be returned back to the environment. So out of all this process, you can see that nitrogen came into the living objects, become the part of the organic molecule, and now it has been returned back to the returned back to inorganic form. Now let me mention 2 points, then I would be finishing my lesson. First of all, keep this in mind that this process is anaerobic. Nitrogen fixation is strictly anaerobic and it cannot be performed. It cannot be performed in aerobic environment, which means there must be no oxygen. This process is strictly anaerobic. Either free-living or symbiotic bacteria performing this process. This process must be in anaerobic condition. Secondly, let me tell you, there are some very important points in this whole cycle. What are those? That someone may ask you in which steps the bacteria are involved in this whole nitrogen cycle. Number one, although you can see all over there is a control of bacteria, but in nitrogen fixation, bacteria are involved. Then in nitrification, the bacteria are involved too. In assimilation, bacteria are not involved. Assimilation means the nitrate becoming the part of the plant. Bacteria are not involved. And then decomposition, bacteria are involved. So third is here, decomposition. And the fourth is when nitrate is becoming denitrified, so bacteria are involved here. So be very careful while talking about the conversion of different compounds into other, at how are these getting converted into, and either the bacteria are involved or not. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson, and I am expecting some very creative questions in the comment section down below. Thank you very much.